Okay, hello everyone, and it's my pleasure to welcome Corinne Clark here today. Corinne's an author who's just published a book, which I've actually got a copy of here.
Yes.
Oh, if my Zoom will not fade it out, The Butcher's Daughter. So to start with, Corinne, can I just ask you to talk a little bit about your background, why and how you started writing, and your journey to publication?
Sure. I wrote a lot when I was young, as a child and as a teenager and going into university. And then my life kind of took a bit of a different path. I went into the theater and I went into theater design. So I went to the Bristol Theater School. And I lived in England for a few years. Then I moved back to Canada. My life took another detour into the legal profession, but we'll just skip that bit for now. And I became interested in writing again, I would say 2011. So I started taking classes from the University of Toronto, which of course was close to where I lived, and they had online classes and in-person classes. And I decided to do, they have a certificate program in creative writing. So I decided to do the whole program, which was a certain number of classes, and then you had to do a 50,000 word final project with one of the instructors as your mentor. So I chose as my mentor a woman called Kelly Armstrong, who's a very proficient author who's published lots and lots of books in lots of genres for lots of different age groups. So that was set in Victorian London, and it was called Haunting Charlotte. So I did 50,000 words with Kelly, and that was my final project. And that year, it was chosen to win the Penguin Random House Canada Student Award for Fiction, which was very exciting. And around that time, I went to a conference for writing for children, and I paid $75 to have a 15-minute session with an agent to get feedback on some of my writing because I'd never had the opinion of an agent before. And I should mention I did also take some in classes privately with another instructor who wasn't associated with the University of Toronto, and that was very helpful. So I met the agent, and she read the first part of Haunting Charlotte, only a couple thousand words, and we had the 15 minutes. And she was asking me questions about it and asking questions about me and my writing, and asked if we could stay in touch and if I would reach out when the manuscript was finished. So I was very excited. And of course I said, yes, absolutely. Then she phoned me a few days later and said, I can't stop thinking about what you wrote. So could we meet for coffee? So I met with her for coffee, and I didn't have a finished manuscript, but she said, I've never done this before, but I really like what you've written and I'd like to sign you as a client. So she signed me as a client, even though I didn't have a finished manuscript. And the wonderful thing about that too is she had been a senior editor for Penguin Books. So she had a lot of editorial experience, which was great because I was really starting out. I'd taken classes in school, but I really didn't have anything published. I think I had one story published. So I finished Haunting Charlotte and I got her feedback on it, but it was problematic in terms of trying to get it traditionally published. You know, it was my first full manuscript. That was a little cliche in parts, a little predictable. And so I left Haunting Charlotte aside, although I would like to go back to it at some point. So I am getting somewhere with this. And when Stephen Sondheim passed away a couple of years ago, there was an obituary in one of the major US newspapers. I can't think which one at the moment, but the obituary mentioned Stephen Sondheim as being the author of the musical Sweeney Todd, wherein the murderous barber, kills people and makes them into pies. And there was an incredible backlash when people said, well, no, wait a minute. He's not the one who made people into pies. It was Mrs. Lovett who made people into pies. And so then there were these, oh, there they go, leaving the woman out of the story again. And they actually had to print a correction to the obituary to say, okay, it was Sweeney Todd, but Mrs. Lovett was the person who made people into pies. So this brings me to my co-author, David Demchuk, who is already a known Canadian horror author with a couple of published books, and he'd won some awards and that kind of thing. So he saw this on Twitter as conversations going back and forth, and he said, somebody should write the story of Mrs. Lovett. Nobody's ever done it before. And someone else replied with, yeah, someone should write it. Maybe you should write it. And he said, well, maybe you should write it. They said, no, I think you should write it. And all of this conversation exists on Twitter. So then he said, well, I'm going to go talk to my agent. And it just so happened that his agent was my agent. So he went to her and said he had this idea. He wanted to write the story of Mrs. Lovett, but it would take him 8 years to do all the research. And did she know anyone? Did she happen to know anyone who was a writer who knew a lot about Victorian London? I know a lot about Victorian London. So our mutual agent right away said, I actually do know somebody. And so the three of us got together on a Zoom call, and we didn't know if it would work. We didn't know if we'd get along. We didn't know if we'd be able to work together or anything like that. But we thought, well, let's give it a try. So the three of us had the meeting and we thought, okay. And David said to me, can you tell me some things from Victorian London that you haven't seen written about a lot or at all? Things that are a little unusual maybe that we could use to make this a little different. So I started mentioning some things. I'll give you an example. One is an anatomical Venus, which you should look that up because they're very interesting and very creepy. And so just as an aside, an anatomical Venus is, it was an anatomical aid for doctors. I think they were in the 18th century anyway, in the early 19th century, but they looked like women sleeping. They were quite provocative poses and looked like they, had flushed cheeks and that. And sometimes they even had pearl necklaces. But their torso, the top of their torso could be removed and their organs could be taken out. So they're really kind of horrifying and sexualized dead women in a very disturbing way, but they're fascinating. Anyway, that's an example. So I was mentioning some of these things and David made notes, and it was from there that together we created the character of Mrs. Lovett. And we were lucky because she didn't have a story, which is incredible to me because The Penny Dreadful was written in the 1840s. And we've heard lots about Sweeney Todd. And I couldn't believe that no one else had ever said, I'm going to try to write the story of Mrs. Lovett. And so when they came to me with the idea, it was very exciting and we could do anything we wanted because she didn't have a history. So it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, that is really interesting. Are we allowed to ask who your agent is?
Yes, her name is Barbara Burson, but she doesn't do agenting anymore. She's representing David and I on this project, but she's gone back to editing work. So
Right. Okay. And well, let's talk a little bit about how was it co-authoring with David? How did you work that? Do you both do some of the writing, or did he write it and then you change it to make it fit in with the period? How did
yeah,
it work?
it's a good question because we kind of fell into a way of working. We didn't sort of plan ahead of time how we were going to work together. But because I was the one with the Victorian knowledge, David decided it would be interesting to have an epistolary format because it kind of adds to the mystery a little bit. And we like the idea of having this dossier of documents, that you can kind of flip through, that kind of thing. And so I started writing a document to kind of try to find a Victorian voice. And I wrote a number of pages and I sent them to David. And David kind of wrote some stuff and mixed in some of his writing with my writing, and that gave him some ideas. So the way that we began to work was David would come up with sort of main story points and send me notes. Very broad though, sort of saying, I think this would be interesting if it happened next. Here's an idea for a couple of characters. Let's see what you do with it type of thing. And he'd work on some of his own things and I would write some things. And I was able to generate a lot of material. And I would send him all of the material. And he had a way of weaving them together. I still don't know how he did it, but there's parts where some of the paragraphs, some of the sentences are written by me and some of them are written by David. So it truly was a collaboration in that sense. And I'm very proud of the fact that I don't think you can tell two different writers wrote the book. And it really was about 50-50, I would say. There are parts that were more heavily David and more heavily me, but there are certainly parts that, you know, have our hands in equally.
Did you kind
And
of did you find you did more of one character and he did more of another? Because the documents are kind of between different people, aren't they?
they
Did
are.
you just all did you both contribute to all of them?
We did, but I wrote the first draft of, I don't want to give much away, but the full diary that starts, which is sort of like the last third of the book. I did the first rough draft of that, which is, we'll say, Marjorie's true voice, because at the beginning of the book, her letters are filtered through Sister Catherine. She's in a priory, um, and she's not as well educated, right? She grew up a butcher's daughter in the East End of London, and we decided she had some education. She could read and write, but she wasn't as educated as these nuns. So Sister Catherine was this filter at the beginning. And then we wanted it to be an abrupt change when she comes into her own and starts to use her own voice. And David felt that one of us should take a crack at writing that all in one shot for that reason, to sort of keep the voice. And then I wrote that and I sent it to him. And again, he reworked it, he revised it, he added some things in, and we had a lot of discussions about what should we keep, what should we take out. He had story ideas from things that I had written and said, oh, well, it would be really interesting if we did this. Why don't we try that? And a year and a half later, we had a book together. So yeah, it worked very, very well. And it's been nice for me to have David be, with him being experienced and that kind of thing. He's been a great help and guide for me.
Yeah, I'd say a year and a half working like that is actually pretty quick because there's a lot of back and
It
forth
is.
discussion and
Yes, and he lives in Newfoundland. So virtually all of it was done by Zoom and phone calls. We've still only met 3 times in person, and the third time was at a launch event in Toronto. So it was all done. It was all done virtually, which has its own challenges, but it worked out in the end.
so what did you find like the main benefits of working with someone else? I guess they spur you on, but is there anything else
Yes.
that is a benefit rather than just working on your own?
Yeah, I think being able to bounce the ideas off each other, and even I would start a character and David would take the character and run with them. And we took little bits that the other wrote and would try things, play with things, and send things back and forth. And we actually got along remarkably well when I think about it. We didn't have any serious major disagreements or anything. We were able to kind of work things out or write a piece and send it to the other person. So that had a lot of value to me, and somebody with experience who I knew was a good writer to kind of guide me through it has just been invaluable. I'm so lucky to have had this experience. I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah, no, it sounds really good. Were there any downsides to working in that manner?
Any downsides? None that immediately spring to mind, surprisingly. I think we worked really well together, and I think the biggest challenge now is that I have to write a book on my own.
So
So
Linda just asked in the chat actually, are you planning to co-author again together or not?
We don't have any definite plans to write together, but I would say we would if the opportunity came up. I mean, we killed a lot of people in this book.
So there's not a sequel.
Um, yeah, so there's that. But we did work incredibly well together, and we're both very proud of the book. And I'm really interested to see how it lands with people. And I imagine if it does extraordinarily well, then it's probably likely we'll have a conversation about doing something else together. But
Yeah. And
yeah.
when was the release date?
So it was going to be released May 20th in the UK, but that date's been pushed back to June 24th. There's a company called The Broken Binding, like a book subscription company, and they're doing a limited edition of 500 copies that have, special end papers and that kind of thing. And because of a technical issue, they weren't going to be able to release it the same day as the hardcover, and they decided they wanted those released at the same time. So that's been pushed to June 24th. But it did come out in North America May 6th with a different publisher. So it actually has two publishers. We have Soho Press, who have the North American rights, and then we have Titan Books in the UK that have UK and translation rights. So Soho Press brought out their book May 6th, and it's done very well so far, particularly in the United States. I mean, it's very, very early, but we got great reviews in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and BroadwayWorld.com, which is obviously not a lot of books are going to get mentioned there, but because it's got the Sweeney Todd connection,
Mm.
you know, had that. But so it's interesting because having two different publishers, the covers are completely different. I don't know if you've seen the North American version.
No, I haven't.
Very different, which is fascinating because they're two different markets, obviously. Um, and the interior design is different as well because they're different documents, and some of them are meant to be newspaper clippings and telegrams and that kind of thing. Each publisher did their own design work on the interior, so I find that really interesting as well. And each publisher is doing their own version of the audiobook. So the American audiobook version is out with three British actors playing the parts, two female and one male, and they've done an incredible job. It's really good. And then the Titan Books is coming out with their own audiobook, which is just one female actress reading all of the documents. So it'll be interesting to see how that differs.
So how did that come about? Is that something your agent put in place where she decided that it was better to have a separate publisher for certain world territories because they know the markets better?
Yeah, that's right. She was sending the manuscript out to publishers everywhere, doing research to figure out what would be the best publishers to send it to. And Soho Press in the US and Titan Books in the UK both responded that they were interested in it. And she decided there would be, benefits to having a UK publisher for the UK and world and a publisher that really knows the North American market very, very well, particularly the American market. So her advice to us was, I think we should do a deal with each publisher, which is what we did. So then the publishers had to work together as well. And it was decided that the main editorial work would be done by Soho in North America, in the United States. And as an aside, the editor that we have with Soho Press, if you want to talk about luck in life and this kind of thing and doors opening, the editor for Soho Press, when he received the manuscript, was already a huge fan of Mrs. Lovett in particular, and he had a tattoo of a bloody rolling pin. And he was a fan of David's work. So he said when the manuscript came in and he saw that it was Mrs. Lovett, he said he just thought, oh my gosh. So we have been blessed to have an editor who is so enthusiastic about the book. And that has been a gift. And his feedback has been incredible. So we're very lucky to have him.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Yeah, talk about the stars aligning there.
Right, exactly. And well, that's one of those funny things in life where things just work out and it went across the desk of the best person who probably could have gone before. And he's just been incredible to work with. So
And what's your kind of experience of working with these two publishers? Obviously they've helped you prepare the book and they've distributed it. What do they bring
yes.
to the table beyond that? Do they bring like marketing opportunities or how does, what else do they do?
Yes, that's a good question too. So we had the full editorial services, which was a lot more in depth than I realized because being new to this, I didn't realize how many rounds of revisions there would be because we had revisions with our first editor, Nick, who I just mentioned, and we had a couple of back and forths of the manuscript with him. And there was copy editing revisions, and then they sort of did what they called a cold revision where they gave it to someone who'd never read it before and they read it and a line editor read it and it went through a lot of revisions, but amazingly, you do catch things every time.
Yeah.
So you think, I've read it 900 times and I'm sure it's perfect. I'm being facetious. And then an editor would come back and say, well, there's this and there's this. And by that time, you've read it so many times yourself, you're completely sick of it and you can't see if there's any mistakes. And, somebody does have to point them out. So all of that editorial work for sure was amazing. And Nick really helped make the characters, how can I say it? He would sort of say, this character's really great. Can we expand her bit a little bit more? Or this bit here is a bit confusing to me. I don't understand. Can we fix that? So once the editorial process was over, we had someone design the cover and design the inside. And we also have publicists. So we have different publicists. We have one in North America and we have one in the UK. So because the book isn't out here yet, part of the reason I'm here now is it was supposed to be out. So they were going to maybe line up some things for me to do while I was here and sign some books and that kind of thing. So that's not happening. But in terms of the US edition, I was in New York just over a week ago and I made an appearance at the Mysterious Bookshop and I went to a couple other bookstores and did some signings and I went to a party and they're the ones who've sent the book out to, major media for interviews and reviews and that kind of thing. And that's how we got the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. And we got a blurb from Gregory Maguire, which was an unexpected, pleasant shock to everyone. And that was our editor who just took a chance. And we were told that Gregory Maguire doesn't do blurbs, but our editor sent the book through to his agent and we got the blurb back. And that has been incredible. And that was something that the publisher was able to line up. The other thing the US publisher did was create swag bags, I guess we call them here, for influencers, particularly people on social media, independent booksellers, even librarians. They actually made candles that looked like little pies. And they put a sticker on the top, from the book cover. They also put in a quill pen and some powder you can mix into ink and then little pieces of paper that say from the desk of in the font of the book, like extraordinary package of swag bag, but it works because I've had people who have received them tag me on social media and say, oh, I got the candle and I got all of that and I'm very excited about it. So it's interesting to see the different ways they think of marketing the book. And I have a meeting later this week with the UK publicist, and we're going to talk about what things we can do to promote it here in the UK.
So they're obviously working with fairly big budgets if they're able to create that kind of stuff, because that's really good.
Yeah, it was very good. I did get one of the candles, and it's one issue they had was there were some people who thought it was actual pie. So
Well, someone ate one.
it turned out it was a candle, but that's okay. So, yeah.
Wow. Linda, I asked, I mean, this is putting you on the spot, but is there a little bit you could read to us?
Me?
Yeah, like an
You're gonna
ex.
be? Yeah,
Yeah.
I have to go grab a copy of the book
Yeah,
if you
that's
don't.
fine. Yeah, yeah, go for it.
You wait one moment.
Yeah, sure, sure.
Okay, just a moment.
All right, I'm going to have one last one for you. Do you have any
Okay.
final pearls of wisdom for writers, especially those trying to get their work published for the first time?
Well, you've probably heard it before, but I would say never give up. And part of the reason I say that is my debut novel just came out and I just turned 54. So I'm an emerging writer, and I think in the last few years it's changed as to what an emerging writer is because there was a major literary prize in Canada, and it was an emerging writers prize. And up till just a couple of years ago, one of the requirements was that you had to be 35 or under. And there was, a lot of people said, look, you've got to get with the times because there's lots of emerging writers who are older than 35. And as I mentioned earlier, my life went in a couple of different directions, and I came to back to writing when I was a little bit older. I would say definitely don't give up and don't worry about how old you are, and don't worry if your debut novel is coming out when you're 54 or 64 or 74. The other one is the way that I met my agent. I would say networking is really, really important, and to take every opportunity you get to meet anybody in the industry because writing is a very isolating, can be, right? It's a very solitary pursuit. So it's good to get out there anyway and socialize. But the way I met my agent and the way I've met other people who've helped me along is by going to conferences and taking workshops and classes and that kind of thing. So that's actually another big piece of advice I would give is network and go to things and introduce yourself to people and take any opportunity you can get to put your work in front of someone to ask some advice, anything like that.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time.